Genndy Tartakovsky, one of the world's most prolific showrunners who's created such hits as Dexter's Lab, Samurai Jack, and Primal, has just released the first 2 episodes of his new series, Unicorn Eternal Warriors. But what is it about, and just how good is it really? In this video, I go over the premise of the show and the main characters, as well as some interesting production details, such as the fact the show was actually created nearly 20 years ago and was pitched to several networks before finally finding a home. Whether you've seen these first couple episodes and want to discuss it here, or if you're on the fence about watching it, stick around. This video has minor spoilers for episodes 1 and 2, but you can trust me when I say you'll have a great time checking out the show after this video, because there's a lot of interesting little details and inspirations I'd like to tell you about that'll make watching it even cooler, like how a scene like this was inspired by the 7 dwarves. To quickly give you the premise of the show, it's about these 3 ancient warriors who have their souls reincarnated into the bodies of 3 very different young adults of 1890s steampunk London. They navigate their new magical powers as well as coming to terms with their identities and pasts, while fighting the forces of darkness. I would say it's definitely Genndy's most complex show, at least from its initial premise and introduction episodes. The show starts with these 3 ancient warriors fighting a dragon in ancient Egypt. They get hurt, but Merlin and this big round robot from the future named Copernicus show up, and Merlin tells the warriors that Copernicus is from the future and will command their souls to awaken again when needed someday. I know that's a big spoonful so far to comprehend, but to make more sense of this, let's take a quick look at the 3 main characters. First, we have the main protagonist Emma, whose wedding ceremony is crashed by the spiritual guide robot Copernicus. It awakens the soul of the eternal warrior Melinda inside of her. This turns her hair black and gives her these mysterious powers that resemble these dark flames. Melinda leaves the wedding, screaming that she's not Emma and escaping through the shattered stained glass window above the altar. The second episode introduces us to the 2 other main characters. Alfie lives in an abandoned school for orphans. Like, damn, how are they gonna abandon the orphans? Come on. He lives here with his comrades after the school shut down, and we see a little flashback that Emma's actually been to this abandoned school before to watch a soccer match when it was still up and running. We see the school's soccer team playing very rough and underhanded against Emma's fiance Winston. I guess we would call him Emma's fiance still, since they never completed their wedding. This gives us insight that Alfie belongs to a group of ruffians, but does what he needs to do in order to survive, despite his circumstances. When the soul of Sang, a monk who transcends the cosmic plane, awakens within Alfie, he experiences what I can only describe as psychedelic bliss and enlightenment. We see Alfie / Sang, see, I told you this was gonna be complex, I don't even know what to call him anymore, floating in the air, and he sees the souls of his orphan friends, and tells them what they need is the love of each other. The schoolmates try to beat some sense into him, but he beats them all pretty easily, with what I can only assume are manifestations of his spirit attacking in all different directions all at once. At the same time, he's witnessing the wonders of the cosmic plane / dimensions, such as cosmic turtles floating by. They mention in the episode these visions are pretty crazy to give to someone so young and inexperienced, but maybe there's a part of Alfie's character we'll get to know that gives him some kind of advantage for why he has these cosmic powers. Finally, we have the magician Dimitri, who invites Emma on stage for his performance, but Copernicus awakens the soul of the blue elf-like warrior Edred inside of him. They show a flashback of Edred kissing Melinda, but here in the current day, Edred kisses Emma, who's not Melinda currently, and has no idea who he is. So one thing that's really interesting of these 3 characters is Edred seems to be fully in control of his soul and body, and we have no further mention of Dimitri this episode at least. Emma kind of wavers between being Emma and Melinda, and Alfie, well,
I'm on that good cushion alcohol.
The second part of the Awakening introduction episodes ends with the characters fighting a big zombie elephant brought to life by this mysterious mastermind we see in the shadows. They know who the Unicorn Eternal Warriors are, and plans to destroy them in their new inexperienced forms. While this elephant is rampaging, Winston tries to get Emma to run away with him, but she has to fight, and in her rage, her powers not only stop the elephant, but destroy a lot of her surroundings. She finds Winston Winston buried under the rubble, who's unconscious, if not dead. But before we can determine his fate, Emma flies away while Edred watches in sadness and confusion. So yeah, even recapping the events and characters is kinda tough and confusing for me. Don't get me wrong, I'm really loving this so far, but even referring to a character is kinda like, should I say Melinda did that or Emma did that? I'm looking forward to seeing the answers to some questions I have, like, will we see Emma interact with Melinda in some kind of spiritual dimension or something? Why does Edred know and remember much more than the others? I'm excited to know more about these characters and how their lives will intertwine with the Warriors as well as each other. It's a super unique concept. So now that you know the characters and premise, let's talk about the really interesting production and inspiration behind Unicorn Eternal Warriors. One of the craziest details of this show is that Genndy has been working on it for 20 years. I feel that's both depressing and inspiring. He's pitched the show several times, like to Cartoon Network and Netflix before it was picked up by HBO Max. It's really ironic that when the show was finally greenlit, the company to do it was the one that then canceled and removed a huge amount of animated content, and yet somehow this survived. Even a showrunner as prolific as Genndy had struggles getting his pitch accepted, which seems to be in large part due to it not being tied to an existing property, and networks and investors value the guaranteed assurance of already successful properties. So investors don't want Genndy to make original content, but they also don't want him making Symbionic Titan Season 3.
No. You know what? That's it. I'm done. I quit.
When talking about what inspired the creation of Unicorn Eternal Warriors, Genndy says he wanted to work on something with an art style more volumetric after animating his more flat, graphic and shape-based shows like Dexter's Lab and Samurai Jack, and his work he did on Powerpuff Girls. Genndy has a lot of inspirations that show in his work, and we can see them in the style of the characters while also looking at Genndy's experience as a director. The main influences to make note of here are Osamu Tezuka, the creator of Astro Boy, Max Fleischer, known for Popeye and Betty Boop, as well as Hayao Miyazaki, especially with his movie Howl's Moving Castle. Starting with Tezuka, you may know Genndy was hired to direct an Astro Boy movie in 2004 that never got released. It's a relatively well-known fact that Tartakovsky has several anime inspirations. We can see that even in the hairstyles of characters, like we see here on some sketches from Primal I found while looking for mentionings of Tezuka. You can also see this especially in some other hairstyles, like Lance from Symbionic Titan. What Genndy found inspiring about Tezuka was his imagination and action he conveyed, as Genndy read through the Astro Boy comics in preparation for directing the Astro Boy movie. Even some poses the characters do can be very Tezuka-esque at times. Like this Alfie pose here feels very Astro Boy to me. The other big aesthetic inspiration is Max Fleischer, but it's kind of funny because Genndy also acknowledges how Tezuka was really inspired by Fleischer and Disney, so there's this cycle of inspiration where he's inspired by the guy who's inspired by the other guy he's inspired by. Anyways, Max Fleischer is known for creating animated classics such as Popeye and Betty Boop, and you can really see this in the style of the characters. The main character Emma has a head shape like Betty Boop, which I rarely ever see in animation. I feel it's hard to pull off, but she looks great. The characters seem to have proportions and hands like Popeye characters, barring the spinach muscles. And I should note, Genndy was also directing a Popeye animated movie that looked beautiful but got cancelled, just like the Astro Boy movie he was directing. This man is so unlucky sometimes. So it makes sense why Genndy would be well versed and inspired by this art style and proportions. Another thing Genndy says he was really inspired by for the style of the show was how Snow White could have such cartoony looking dwarves, yet they can have such emotional moments despite this. Genndy says, "You know the scene where Snow White is dying and the dwarves are all there crying? They have giant noses and are super cartoony, but everybody is crying, and you feel that emotionality." That was it. I would say despite only seeing 2 episodes so far, that makes total sense. I mean, we have a really sweet wedding scene, and the characters look so happy. We see Emma's father as a tough, gruff old man, and she tells him it's okay to cry, and you know, he has a big cartoony nose and a style akin to Asterix. But it's a really sweet scene. Well, before the robot Copernicus crashes the wedding and awakens the soul of the warrior Melinda inside of Emma, ruining planning the wedding. I love the art style, and the lore and world building have a lot of interesting steampunk elements to them that may partially be a holdover from a more prevalent theme the show was going to have. In a recent interview, when Genndy was asked what the inspirations were behind the aesthetics, he says, "We wanted this old aesthetic, but told in a very contemporary way, with contemporary filmmaking, and that was the key." I think this quote helps us not only understand the art style, but maybe also the steampunk environment of the show. Unicorn takes place in 1890 London, but you know, steampunk. I really like steampunk in animation. When asked about its incorporation, the show's head writer, Derek Bachman, says the following. I think it's because it's the birth of modern technology. It's a time when so many different forms of technology became a part of our everyday lives. People were so enamored with the idea of the future, and now we look at it as the past and beginnings of modern conveniences of our technological present. There's a romance to it. Over the nearly 20 years this show was cooked, Genndy says there were a lot of changes in the themes and conflicts and tropes, like machinery versus magic, or certain elements of incorporating mechanisms into society were subsequently used in a lot of other media, possibly to the point of becoming cliche now. So the years it took to greenlight this show had several elements change in interesting ways. There are a lot of interesting steampunk elements to the town, from the vehicles to the design of Copernicus, so maybe the steampunk elements aren't as important in the final released show as they may have been when it was first conceptualized, but I really love the steampunk incorporation. They have unique, beautiful designs, like look at the fire department and their vehicles. It gives me as much awe as it does further curiosity. I'm asking myself, how does this vehicle machine even work? While at the same time admiring how cool the uniforms and designs are. The last thing I want to mention regarding the production is that while Unicorn seemed to have been set to be a longer series before being slated as a 10-episode miniseries, they hint about having way more planned if it's successful. They discuss instead of 1890s steampunk London, it could be 1920s steampunk Chicago. I don't know too much about what the show is yet, so I can't exactly say how much I'd love a continuation in a new time period, but the concept of the main cast of characters changing in a new setting would be pretty cool. I mean, I love their designs and the style and scenery, so I definitely love more, but story-wise I just don't know yet how it would make sense. But I trust the writing and directing ability of this team 100%, so I'm sure it would work well. Thinking about it more, I wonder if we would see new warriors being reincarnated. That would be interesting to the lore of the world and its warriors. I don't want to speculate too much on sequels while we're 20% through the original show, but I just wanted to share the fact that there could be sequels in the work, so make sure to give the show a chance now while it matters most. So yeah, overall, the characters are interesting, the character style and backgrounds are gorgeous, the plot is complex yet leaves me wanting more, and it's really fascinating that this show has been brewing for 20 years and has some really interesting inspirations. I'd love to know your thoughts on it so far below in the comments. If you liked the video, feel free to subscribe. I'm uploading weekly and I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the summer, you know, if you're kind of chill like that. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.